Hello, everybody. My name is Lynda Clark. I'm the editor of First Time Buyer magazine. I'd like you to welcome you today to our podcast celebrating National Home Buying Week, which is on the first week of October. First Time Buyer has always been very keen to educate and give people as much information as we can about getting on the housing ladder. And today I'm joined by Esaiyas Mollallegn, who is the head of marketing at Resi. And Esaiyas, you have, well, welcome first of all. Thank you very much for coming along today. But you have done quite a, well, revolutionary thing with education, trying to educate young people about finances, getting prepared for their future, particularly once they've left school. So, can you just give us a bit of a background about how that all started and what sort of created this?
Sure. Hi, Linda. First and foremost, yeah, lovely to be here. This is something that I'm very passionate about. I work for an organisation called Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, and So Resi is the shared ownership brand that sits within that organisation. And probably about 18 months ago now, we carried out a piece of research focusing on um, those aged between 18 to 30 and their views when it comes to home ownership. And what hit us as we looked at some of the results from that research piece was the lack of understanding and education when it comes to home ownership and shared ownership. And I think that was probably the catalyst to look at this more in depth and look at what we could possibly do to help educate the next generation when it comes to home ownership. And that's where it all started from.
Very interesting. So, with this research, did you were there findings about people struggling in rented accommodation and they just couldn't raise deposits, or they just didn't know what was out there, how they could actually get onto the ladder?
Yeah, I think what was interesting was more than half of those who were questioned were living in rented accommodation. Many of them viewed renting as a necessity, and 60% said it was all that they could afford, and so that came through quite strongly. And affordability was also seen as the biggest barrier to home ownership. So, it was loud and clear from the data that we could see that we're living in an environment at the moment where young people could feel possibly lack the aspiration to potentially own a home because of the barriers that they feel that they come against. So we definitely felt that came across quite strongly.
And it's not going to really get any easier with the rents rising. Um, I don't think people's salaries are going up in, conjunction with the rising and the cost of living. So it is really tough. So tell me how it progressed from there. You had this research. You realised that you wanted to go out and try and help people or young people particularly. How did it go up from the next stage?
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me as part of that research piece was the amount of people who were interested in shared ownership um, was was relatively low, I would say, on the
Mm,
research piece. But once they saw our literature uh, had the product explained to them, the number of people who would consider shared ownership rose significantly. And I
yes.
think that made me think of my own back. I think there's a lack of understanding as to the options that people have, just
Yeah.
generally, when it
Yeah.
comes to home ownership. And so what I did was I spoke to a chair of governors for a school, Fulham Boys School,
Wow.
originally, and said, look, this is something that we've done. I sent him details of the research paper, the roundtable event that we held, and the interest that we as an organisation had to pursue this further, and that they bought in and they said, look, come in, carry out a couple of sessions with us, and I was then able to kick it off from that point
Yes.
initially. But yeah, it was something that as an organisation, I think. We've carried out our own separate piece of research Housing Futures have done. So it seemed quite timely. Not only were the organisation itself thinking about this, but we as a department, from a sales and marketing perspective, were also quite aware of the fact that for the next generation, it could easily lead to a cycle of renting or without knowing entirely what those options are. And that resonated with me personally, if I'm going to be honest as well. I think that was the biggest factor.
Absolutely. Really interesting and quite daunting to go into a boys' school as a non-teacher and have to stand there and talk and explain. Um, how did you approach that? What did you do? I mean, it wasn't really a lesson, it was more like a sort of chat, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I spent a good, I'd say, 3 months working on what kind of literature we should cover.
Yes,
And to be honest, it's not perfect now. You want to evolve it and move it forward and make sure it fits the needs of the students more appropriately week on week, month on month, year on year when you do this. But so we worked with the agency that we work with internally and looked at, okay, what would be the key factors that we want to get across? What are the
mm,
messages that we want to deliver? What kind of, and also you want it to be engaging. You want people to
yes,
enjoy what they're um, listening to and make it interactive. So some tasks and some interactive elements. So we work through it quite extensively to make sure that there's discussions as well, not just someone standing there speaking at them
no,
for an hour, but also for them to be able to discuss it amongst themselves and probably think about things that they probably haven't thought about or given any time of day
no,
to at the moment. But yeah, so that's how we structure it simply as a initially a bit of an introduction to housing. You know,
yes,
what are the options? What kind of houses exist from simply from flats to terraced houses to mansions. And being a bit adding a bit of humour into it as well. And then looking at the products. Renting and buying, the pros and cons of renting and buying.
yes,
Why would someone choose to rent? Why would someone choose to buy? And making them think about that,
yeah,
because I think it's about choice, isn't it? As long as people understand what are you looking for at the moment, at that moment in your life, will
yes,
give you then the ability to make those decisions appropriately. And then moved on to affordability and costs and a number of other points as well. Yeah, so we focused on housing, fundamentally what type of houses existed. So terraced houses, flats, semi-detached and mansions, but also looked at the different types of home ownership or housing,
yes,
renting or buying. What are the pros and cons of renting or buying? It depends on the person's position and their life at that moment to make that decision for themselves. It's not about one's the right choice, the choice that you have to make, and one's the choice the least a negative choice. It's about making the right choice for yourself, and so giving people the options to think about those positives and negatives, and taking those decisions from an informed position. And then we went forward to discuss affordabilities and financials and a number of other items.
really interesting. Having had three boys, I know how hard it is to actually engage. I presume they were what, 17, 18? Were they sort of on the cusp of leaving school?
Yes, so yeah,
Yeah,
year 12s, year 13s was
yeah,
the target market, as it were, for the delivery of this piece. But yeah, I think with Fulham Boys School, it was year 12s were the first session that was held to.
really.
And I'd say, yeah, it's never easy or straightforward when you're external coming into a school, you're a
No,
new face. And, I think it was held over 2 weeks, but I was really happy to how it went. I felt there was a lot of engagement, a lot of good conversations, and even a couple of the students afterwards, I think after on the second week, came up to me and said, "Look, can we look at potentially doing some work experience with you or your work or things like that, taking it further?" So there's definitely
wow.
buy-in to the whole industry, let alone just the fact of buying or renting and home ownership as, in
Yeah,
and of itself.
yes, because of course all these boys lived at home and they probably never envisaged, at that moment in their life that they will ever leave because, they haven't got any money. But I think it's amazing to plant that seed at that point because that will only grow, and it will encourage them when they do actually get out into the real world, to know what choices they have got to make. Brilliant, absolutely. And has this gone further? Have you done more schools since then?
Yes. So I was recently, I think towards the middle of July, I was in a school in Nottingham,
Oh,
and held, I think, 3 or 4 sessions on that day. So that was very very good as well. We're continuing to speak to our internal team. It's called Housing Futures to look at other options. There are a number of opportunities potentially with a number of other schools to take it further. I think the
yes,
key for me is, as you're probably aware, Linda. I'm a one-man band at the moment,
Yes.
and so it makes it quite difficult to be able to take up all these opportunities. So we're looking at strategically how we can take this topic further first and
Yes.
foremost, and see how we can develop this into a curriculum that goes into schools more formally, because obviously I've got my day job and I can't give up all my time naturally. I would love to be able to do everything, but there's only so many hours in a day. So it's looking at how can we do more. So yeah, there's some exciting, hopefully, opportunities in the near future.
That's brilliant. I mean, you can't split yourself into a thousand pieces, but I think if it did go on the national curriculum, and some other teacher then did what you're doing yourself, um, and they got that message over, I think that actually the children, well, I mean, they're not the young people, they're not children at that point, would love it because it would be so different to everything else they did, as far away from physics as you can imagine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is. It is so different, and hopefully also aspirational. I think that's the key. I think it's them looking ahead to look. What am I going to do after school? Am I going to go to college? Sorry, am I going to do university? Am I going to do something else? Where am I going to live? How am I going to live? How am I going to sustain that? Am I going to
Yeah,
stay? It's just making. We're not saying you have to make decisions, but it's just to think. And if you think ahead, you can make those
you
appropriate decisions.
well, that's something that I'm really keen and passionate about as well. That people, unless you know all the information, you have no way of making that choice. And I do think with shared ownership, particularly, people are always shocked about the affordability.
Yeah.
Uh, some of the deposits are relatively low. I mean, £5,000 to some people is a fortune. Other people, they think, well, actually, I could draw that together quite easily. So, but they don't understand that you really only have to save that amount and you actually get a foot on the ladder with shared ownership.
I couldn't agree with you more, Linda. I think I think I mentioned to you previously. I lived in a council house with a number of my brothers, and if you asked me back then when I was 14, 15, 16, would you ever be able to own your home? I would have never, ever thought that would have been possible whatsoever. And but I stumbled into the industry and I was able to learn and understand what was going on. And it's I found it an incredible blessing to be able to learn. But there are so many people who might not even think that this is even possible. And
No,
therefore, if they don't even think it's possible, they won't even consider it or think about it or give it any time of day. And I
no,
think that's the key thing, giving people actually, look, this is something that's genuinely possible. Like you said,
mm,
deposits from 5K. Obviously, that might not be in London per se, but in other areas, that is doable. And we're seeing that regularly even now.
absolutely.
So I think it's about giving people the tools to think about, yeah, this is possible. I can save this. And I think the other interesting thing is it's about context, isn't it? It's about if you're not doing shared ownership, which might not be right for you, that's fine. What are the other options?
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
and
What
it's about comparing it in that context, isn't it?
100%?
Yeah, I stumbled into the industry and I was fortunate enough to learn about the options that were open to me. And if I hadn't done that, those things would have always been in the back of my mind. I probably wouldn't have aspired to owning a home just because I wouldn't have thought it would ever be possible. But being in that industry opened my eyes, and I feel like that's now given me the responsibility as well, but also an aspiration to teach and educate as many people as to the fact that they can pursue home ownership. It is something that's realistically possible. But it's also looking at it in context. It's not to say shared ownership is the only way, but it's
No,
just being aware of, what else could I do? Is shared ownership the right way? Maybe not. But if you're renting, it's just being aware of the situation that you find yourself in.
100%. And it is very difficult with young people as well because the sort of saving, it seems a bit weird because, at that point in their lives, they're not earning money. They don't have, they probably have pocket money, but they don't have a wage coming in. So it's very hard to think when I get my first pay packet, how do I cope with that? So I was thinking about it as you were talking. When my boys were young, they were asked to go on a world rugby and hockey tour at school, and it cost a fortune. And I was a single mum at that point, and it was going to be about £6,000 because I have twins. There was two of them, And so I made a deal with boys and I said, okay, well, we had a long time to save up for this, but you've got to help and you've got to start saving something as well. And so during that first summer holidays, they went and cleaned cars. They did odd jobs for people, did bits of work in gardens and things and whatever sort of cheap labour, really. And they earned quite a lot of money. And then when they got old enough, they could actually go and they got a job in a supermarket. And of course, they got paid for that shelf stacking. That's what they were doing. And it was pretty hideous hours, but it was all to go towards this goal. And they were so keen. So if you've got a goal at the end of it, which is actually possibly owning your own home, people do get very inspired and they will pull out all the stops, in my view.
Yeah, and because they knew it was tangibly possible to achieve
Yes,
that goal, it meant that
yes,
they were on that trajectory straight away, thinking, okay, I'm going to do those things. And I think
absolutely.
with housing, it's the same. I think it's making it accessible and saying, actually, this is possible. Because
Yes,
if people believe it's possible, then they will begin that journey to think, okay, I will make these decisions to get me onto this
yeah.
route to eventually maybe own my home, if that's what they wanted to do.
And I do think also there's so many myths, particularly around shared ownership, even though it's been around for what, 40 years plus. There's a lot of myths about, sharing your home with somebody or um, never achieving 100% of it. Because if you just want to explain how it is, it's part buy, part rent. You buy a share and then you hopefully staircase up and buy more shares. Do you want to just explain that, Esaiyas?
Yeah, yeah. So with shared ownership, you only buy a percentage of the home. So that ranges usually from 25 to 75%. And you pay a monthly rent on the unowned equity. So whatever that remaining share is.
Yes,
And as you're probably quite aware, Linda, the product's changed over the years
yes,
significantly. And the product most recently has been iterated further. So it's never been better to buy shared ownership. In many ways, the responsibilities are now shared further. So for the first 10 years,
yes,
often the initial cost of maintaining any defects within the house, certain defects, are
yes,
factored within an allowance that you're given as a homeowner. Usually
yes,
that's capped at £500 a year. So that's great. And obviously the lease terms have been increased and shares have been reduced now to as low as 10%. So it's more accessible and more attractive than it ever has been. But my first home was shared ownership.
was it?
I bought a
Yes.
two-bed maisonette. I would never have been able to buy a property outright if I hadn't gone through shared ownership at the beginning. So definitely for me, it was um, yeah the route into home ownership for me. But I think again, it's about understanding the product, and looking at it
Yes.
as what are the alternatives.
Yeah.
If you're not buying a shared ownership home, then what are you going to do? If you're
Yeah.
renting, often that comes with its own positives and negatives. And in many cases, not always, depending on the area, the total cost of a shared ownership home on a monthly basis can be cheaper than renting.
Mm.
And we live in a world at the moment where rents are going through the roof.
I was about to say that.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm hearing people have almost putting offers on rental properties as you would do on a home that you're buying, which is ludicrous. But that's what you've got to. And yes, the cost of shared ownership does go up. It's not static; it will go up year on year, and you
Mm.
have to go in with your eyes wide open and know those facts and figures and say um, you are sharing that home ownership with a housing association, so there is those rights and responsibilities.
Mm.
Um, are shared to an extent, and so you've got to be aware of those things. But I think it's just being given that information appropriately in advance so that you know that you're making the right decision for yourself and your family, um,
Yeah.
and not just going in blind.
100%. I mean, this whole thing with renting, I hear people that have, it's a bit like when I think now when you put your house on the market to say for sale, you have like an open morning and queues of people, which is quite weird. It wasn't like that when I was buying my home years ago. But now apparently with renting, there's queues and
Mm.
it's extraordinary. Um, and you are actually paying somebody else's bills at the end of it. You're not
Exactly.
going to own any inch of it ever.
No, exactly. And Like I've said to countless friends who've asked me, as you can imagine, being in the industry, people come to me and ask me 1,000 questions, and I'm more than happy to answer them. Yes, with renting, you've got the flexibility. If you want to live in a certain area and then live in another area and then live in another area, you've got that flexibility with
Yeah,
renting, which is great, and you can pursue that, which is great.
yes.
Um, but you've also got that uncertainty, that comes with it. Often, is the landlord going to sell? Are the rents going to go up?
Mm,
And therefore, it's just looking at the facts and making sure you make the right decision. With shared ownership, I feel like you've got given that security primarily. No one can come in and tell you to leave because we're selling the property.
no.
It's yours from that
Yeah.
perspective. But yes, there are costs, and those costs might go up, but rents go up. So and it's a leasehold property, but a lot of leasehold flats are. A lot of properties are leasehold, whether it's shared ownership or not. So I think often the negatives and the myths that come with um, the negative myths that come with shared ownership are often
Mm,
um, linked to leasehold
they,
products, and
they
it's a
are.
leasehold product anyway. Whether and I just think it's often it's just demystifying it is required.
Absolutely. And when you were doing your talks with the boys and the other, was it a mixed school, the one in Nottingham?
Yes, it was. Yeah,
The girls as well. Did you touch on their credit rating? Because I don't think that's ever put out there enough to explain that you need to have credit to show that you are responsible and pay off your bills. But if you have a problem, that can affect your rating, and then eventually you might not get a mortgage very easily.
yeah. I think we touched on it lightly, but not to the depth that we probably could do and should do going forward. You're so right, Linda. I just think
Yes,
lots of people think, oh, it doesn't matter. I'll do this or ignoring that debt or ignoring that issue won't matter. I'll deal with it later. But you're right; it has a knock-on effect
very
further
big,
down the line.
a very big effect. And I think that also, when you're young and you get your first credit card, you max it out because you just think, oh, I can just buy this, and actually you have to pay it back at some point. And it's very easy for young people just to get a bit carried away. Um,
Yeah, I mean, we're all susceptible to these things, aren't we? And therefore, I think it's just being careful about and knowing the knock-on impact. My sister-in-law has had from when she was much, much younger. I think the mobile phone issues and mobile phone debt. It's often that's the biggest culprit. Often, I feel like because you want the newest phone or the newest iPhone, and you go from one phone to the other, but there are consequences to those
there are.
decisions if you're not dealing with things appropriately. But yeah, it's only when you're older you realize, this is hampering me now.
Mm.
And yeah, I think that information is key.
Well, it's really interesting, and I think what you're doing is absolutely amazing. It kind of aligns very much with what First Time Buyer is doing and what National Home Buying Week is doing. Uh, that week is all about education and as much information, which is exactly what you've said. I think you've just won an award for your educational program that you're doing, so that's brilliant. Congratulations.
Thank you
Um,
very much.
Seriously hope that you get to talk to other young people. I know it's a big task, but you don't want to leave it now. You just need to carry on and expand it as much as you can. But hopefully, government might just change it one day, and it'll be there, and you'll have started it. Brilliant.
Yeah, I feel like it's an opportune time. Obviously, with I think it's elections next year, and we're
Yes,
working internally to look at how we can possibly lobby government, look at manifestos, and see what can be done. If you don't have high expectations, you'll never go far. So I'm going to try and aim for the sky, as it were, and see what we can achieve. But nevertheless, it's just about pursuing it one day at a time.
very good. Well, always aim higher, says it's so important, and set your goals to the limit, and then you can fall a little bit, but you'll definitely succeed with this because I think it's so revolutionary. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I hope everybody's enjoyed today. As I say, National Home Buying Week is the first week of October. We'll be so much online. Do go to our website, nationalhomebuyingweek.co.uk. There's podcasts, there's a live webinar, there'll be films, there's educational videos, etc. So much. And Esaiyas, do you want to just give us your website so that Well, thank you so much, Esaiyas. It's been so interesting to hear about the educational program that you've been running. Um, it very much aligns with what First Time Buyer and National Home Buying Week is all about. National Home Buying Week is the first week of October. I do hope you'll go to our website, which is www.nationalhomebuyingweek.co.uk. There will be podcasts, there's films, there's educational videos, there's going to be a live webinar, a whole series of very interesting and, yes, I hate to keep saying the word educational because it makes people think we're all at school, which we're not, but it's all about information, as you say. So I do hope you'll join us for that. Thank you again, Asaya, so much for your time, and it's so interesting. And I wish you lots of luck. It's very hard to do what you're doing, but I know that you're going to get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Linda.
Thank you.